Welcome everyone. Welcome to another edition of Voices of Genius, the dawn of a new earth. I'm excited to be here with you today and our guest, Leigh J McCloskey. There is so much going on as we emerge into this next, well, let's just say trajectory of our collective evolutionary cycle, moving through that Piscean age and into this new age of Aquarius and all that that entails. And whether you can define that or feel it or understand that in your own way is perhaps less relevant to what does that mean to you right now? How can you engage these extraordinary times in a productive, healthy manner where we can help one another, serve the Pachamama, the planet? And today, I'm excited to begin our discussions. And I say that because we're going to have a series of discussions here with Leigh about all of this and more, and really explore the power of the imaginative and why let's just say the human, our ability to dream, as the shamans say, to dream our world into being, to reimagine our sense of how we will engage and be in a deeper relationship with each other and the planet. We get to explore these things today. And we get to do so with none other than Leigh, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for so many years. Welcome, Leigh.
Thank you, Adam, and good to see you after all these years.
Yes, indeed, after all these years.
Yes, does go by quickly.
They certainly do. Well, let me share with each of you a little bit about Leigh J McCloskey. Leigh is an artist, an author, an actor, and a visual philosopher, amongst other things. And his highly creative life has been devoted to exploring the symbolic, the archetypal, and the hidden aspects of the psyche and inner self through his art, scholarship, books, and experiences as a convener of the conversation, this wonderful conversation about our humanity. And as an actor, and as a husband and father and grandfather, I've come to know Leigh as well, a brother, a dear friend, a real comrade in our own collective destiny. And Leigh lectures both internationally and internationally, and has given numerous talks and presentations on the art and significance of visual philosophy. He has written, illustrated, published several books, including his masterpiece of art and writing, The Tarot reviewed possibly as the most significant contribution to the tradition in over 100 years. And we'll let Leigh share a little bit more about how this all began for him in a moment. But I do want to say that there was a point that struck so many of us in more ways than one on 9/11/2001. And this is when it really began to emerge from his home studio, which he calls the hieroglyph of the human soul. And without further ado, Leigh, it's great to be here with you. And before we get started in some nice video pieces that will share the hieroglyph and where we can journey with you into the depth of your work, into the depth of your genius, could you please share with us a little bit about, who exactly are you? And what is that sense of your own soul's work in the world, or wherever that wants to take you? Because for some time, I've been fascinated and curious about what is emerging in and through you, and the imperative now for your work to fully express itself. So it'd be great to know a little more. Please share with us.
You know, Adam, one of the gifts that comes from years passing quickly is that there is the ability to look back and sort of see more of the mosaic of one's life and the missing pieces or the things we can't put together as we're moving through them. But as we look back, we realize, oh, this was a much more interesting play than anything I could have known beforehand. And I joked, but it's rather true about how I feel. I feel like a man who spent most of his life walking backward into a room, meaning that it's not the forward motion of things, but actually this, as I've moved through life and as I've followed questions, it developed, and no one's actually more surprised than I am, this double life, this life as an artist, this life as what became a visual philosopher. And I was very fortunate because I grew up, my dad was a painter, an artist. My mom was a teacher. And my dad would always say, when you can't talk about something, paint it. And being an actor, I used that tool when I was at Juilliard studying acting. I started trying to connect with the characters emotionally by using paint as a medium of expression, not as an illustration of something, but actually as a direct connection to the energy, to the vitality, because I was looking for character. And I realized that over the years that my professional life as an actor created in me a highly protective side about my life as an artist, as what would become a visual philosopher. But when I was doing the television show Dallas in the early 80s, Carla, my wife, and I moved here to our home that we live in now. And I realized that success in one creative life, or what was called success, led to the realization that many of the questions I needed to ask, many of the conversations I needed to have, I couldn't look to my professional life. I couldn't look to the life of an actor for that type of nourishment. So I began opening my home, and I've done so now for the last 41 years, to weekly discussion groups. And I had a 25-year Theosophical discussion group, and to balance that, looking at Western inner tradition, and really spending Tuesdays and Thursdays looking at everything from alchemy and Carl Jung to Blavatsky and Theosophy to the Hermetic and ancient teachings, because I'd always felt that we had inherited this great treasure from our ancestors. And it wasn't given to us. We had to show interest in it. And so I didn't start out with a grand conceit that I would do something. I just kept tending this other garden. And my life as an actor allowed me to, in a way, live without having to turn my art into a way to make money. So I could use it as simply a way to ask questions. And over the years, it became, as the discussion groups became, in a way, it grew to become the greater real. And you had said about 9/11 and that remarkable trauma and tragedy, and what it triggered is that for me, that event triggered what began my work on my studio, called The Hieroglyph of the Human Soul. And I really feel that that's what my life was working up toward, meaning that the actor in me freed me to have what we call suspension of disbelief, not over-identifying with archetype, but to actually be able to journey, to embody. And I had done this with my tarot revision, which I had spent 17 years on. And I had published that right around the turn of the century, right before the collapse. Well, not published, but there was a type of emergence of this one work, which was on the archetypes and the mythic structure of the psyche. And then there was the 9/11, the collapse of the towers. And in that collapse, then that triggered this other work, this Hieroglyph of the Human Soul, in my studio. And so to make a long-winded answer to who am I or what am I, really feel that what I've come to embody is, to a great degree, the relationship with the creative spirit. And in a time where art is not valued, where things are, in a way, always looked at from the accountants of the imagination, where's your audience, where's the bottom line, that this work of mine led me back home. It led me back to become a gardener of the soul, meaning that if we're going to ask these essential questions that Adam and you and I talk about a lot, we have to figure out where we can do that and how we can honor these things. And so my life and my art is an expression of a devotion to saying, at least here, let this matter. I'm not going to make my argument with you about it doesn't matter to you. If it doesn't matter to you, that's fine with me, but that will not be my conversation. I'm like a gardener. If you want to talk about these things, let's talk. Let's inspire each other. We do not need to critique each other. We do this for ourselves. So the question is, how do we gather? How do we remind each other that it's always the quality of the stories we tell ourselves, both inwardly and outwardly, that change the world? It's never knowing who to blame or who's at fault that changes anything.
Well, thank you for that, Leigh. And I have so many fond memories of time in the studio, in the library, and just being in the presence of others. And you as a convener of these discussions. And it really invites, I think, many of us to convene. That is this not a time of convening, of coming together, not as you pointed out in right or wrong or acrimony and all the world and its chaos and conflict and all of that, but to convene in a place of discussion and exploration where we can begin to reimagine and dream and explore the ancient wisdom and the perennial philosophies of our time. This is an invitation, I believe, for any of us and all of us. And that conversation, of course, begins with two of us. Although I do have to admit, I often have conversations with myself, to be honest with you. But the point being is it's such a great invitation at this time. And notwithstanding all the interviews that I've been doing, Leigh, very consistently, I hear from the guest that they're excited and they're grateful for the conversation. Not anything particular of a topical piece of the conversation, but just to be in the conversation. And this is the invitation for us, all of us today, because that is what creates a great impulse of creation, a great impulse of movement, whether you are an artist on a canvas or an artist of consciousness, or you're an artist in your leadership, or we're artist as a mother, as a father. It is all honored in the conversation. And this is the great invitation of our time. So thank you for doing so. And thank you for presencing that today for this conversation. And I'd like to move into looking at a short video clip that invites all of us into a conversation. And I believe that this video and these videos that will follow subsequently are an invitation for all of us. And I know it is for me to be open, to sit and be present for what may not have you've ever heard or felt or seen, but to really come into that place of the imaginative, where you too can become part of this great journey in your own unique way, in your own genius, to become part of that, because we all certainly belong. Leigh, you've spoken much about artificial intelligence, and this is such a big conversation right now. We've seen some emergence of this new intelligence as maybe it's a bit of a lightning rod for artists. where artificial intelligence in some ways is supplanting the artist by seemingly biomimicking or taking the great artist of our time or art in general, be it a Monet or your work or other true artists, and allowing that to be digitized in a format as determined by the person that's inputting it. Now, whether that is a right or wrong is not the question that I want to address today with you. I think it is a big conversation, and I think it is an important conversation for artists to look at technology and to explore that. But it's also what I think is an important conversation for all of us to explore the power of artificial intelligence, but in the context of what you referred to as ancestral intelligence. And that's really where we should keep our eye on and our heart on so that we can explore this greater technology that our ancient ones had, that the shamans and indigenous cultures over the millennia have. And you said that artificial intelligence defines science. Mm-hmm. Ancestral intelligence defines love, and thus the true perennial art. We are developing now the artist of our consciously. We are developing now the artistry of our consciousness. This work is the revelation of AI, ancestral intelligence. What can you share with us about this emergence or this reemergence in connection with ancestral intelligence and how that as a technology can help guide us through and not just artificial intelligence?
The relationship that I found here, and again, what I like to point out is that this was not expected. It's not the illustration of something I knew, but like a great detective story, it's the clues unfolded as I continued on in my exploration within intimate space of the question of myth and archetype and why are we wired the way we are. And my home, where I live, is on Shumash ceremonial ground, sacred ground. And I grew up 2 miles from here, and this as well on Shumash ceremonial and sacred ground. And I began to recognize that being born on sacred ground, that one is a custodian for the ground, for the land. One is not the owner, one does not take, but one begins to cultivate a relationship with the ancestral energies. I think it's very important because what we're talking about with AI, with artificial intelligence, and what I discovered is AI or ancestral intelligence. And it became apparent. This is part of why I became a visual philosopher. It was not that I attributed that to myself, but actually that was what the very process itself was revealing to me, that this was actually engaging. Because if we begin to ask that question of why have we been trained, what is the trauma that has made our own essential part in the story unessential? What is it about artificial intelligence that makes one think, oh, that's real intelligence? Do you see how smart that machine is? Do you see what that can do? It dwarfs this mere human capacity. Well, that's nonsense. And that's what my work is getting at. We are the technology. We human beings are the technology. We don't need technology. We are technology. We are the outcome that was asked a very long time ago about the nature of, can consciousness, composed of its own eternal qualities and genius, create a condition where it itself cannot remember who and what it is, and therefore is forced to pull out of itself in order to survive adaptation that draws forth a unique knowing that is created not from having known things directly, as in times of connection to the stars, but having battled through endless nights of not knowing, endless questions of going, why as human can we not remember our circumstances? Why, in spite of wars, in spite of plagues, in spite of hatreds, in spite of smallness, do we not define ourselves by these things? But why are we actually, in spite of this, always drawing, in a way you would have to argue, the art, the nectar, not that is the difficulty, but that comes from in spite of the difficulty? And this is where the ancestors dwell, not in the judgment of things, but in the relationship that you are the outcome. You wear the weave of all of these questions, all of these qualities and conditions. And if you begin to realize that you are, then with ancestral intelligence, you're the key. The questions you ask will open this technology that you are, or they will keep it shut down. Also, so will your assumptions. And this is the illusion of AI, the simulacrums created by AI art. And we talked about artists. Yeah, I do think that there's a conversation that needs to be had, which is, what and who is the creative act for? What and whom is the essential relationship with the creative act? Because the creative act is the creative spirit. We are composed of the creative spirit. We're composed of the great breath of the great spirit. And I truly believe that what we are being asked, and this is why, I say, but I unintentionally, but I became a cave painter when I began work on the hieroglyph of the human soul on 9/11/2001. So for the last 21 years and some, I have been exercising the oldest technology in the world, paint and storytelling. And it is a picture book. I like to say the hieroglyph means a picture. So it is a picture book. And the ancestors will say, well, we understand pictures. We would interpret the pictures differently than you do, but we understand this picture language. And so this picture language then communicates with all of the ancestors. And this is important because anything in technology, electricity, the ancestors wouldn't know because it wasn't part of that reality, that world. So it remains on the surface like a vibrating reflection. And that keeps attention essentially entrapped by this vibrating energy field. And this is why we must begin to understand that there's ancestral intelligence, there is alien intelligence, there's artificial intelligence, and one could say associative intelligence, but that's a different conversation. But these intelligences, I'm convinced, are tools that are saying it's not to point the finger and say AI is going away or it should. It is. The conversation, I think you were saying earlier on, Adam, isn't about whether it's good or bad or indifferent. It is, which means that it has changed the conversation for us to ask, what is it that we bring to the conversation? And we bring what AI could never have, which is AI. We have ancestral intelligence. We have a DNA structure. We have and are a matrix that now waits for us to begin to trust this matrix so that it can awaken. And that's why I have to say that the cyborgian world of putting a Google chip in one's brain seems about the most barbaric thing a human being could do. I mean that. We are divine technology.
Well, I'm so with you. So with you on that, and I want to invite us right now to experience ancestral intelligence. And this invitation it takes us into the place of perhaps a new lens, a new way to approach this intelligence that is of our greater lineage through the millennia, the indigenous ones, the shamans, and others that you're speaking to. In this invitation, I want to do so as an inspiration of Angeles Arias's work, the social anthropologist who studied these ancient cave painters, these ones that use the symbology of symbols to explore the greater ancestral intelligence within ourselves. And as a matter of fact, this became very, very much integral to some of the work that I've done and some of the master's classes that I offer out in the world, because I believe it's a way to shift our lens of perception to approach these seemingly unapproachable places, these intelligence within ourselves. But enough talk here. Let's take a look right now at these symbols that I would love to hear some of your thoughts around, Leigh. And these are the 5 symbols that she defined that were common throughout cultures over the course of the millennium. We have the equidistant cross. We have the circle. We have the square, the triangle, and of course, the helix, the double helix. And each of these have their own meaning and significance. And as you look at these symbols, and we'll just ask Leigh this, but as each of you look at these symbols, and roll with us for a minute here, Leigh, which one kind of are you gravitating to at a moment? And why don't we use that as a launch point to briefly have a little conversation around these ancient symbols and what they mean and why they are relevant now to explore things in your personal life that may require asking you to explore at a deeper level. But which one maybe comes up for you as a starting point for conversation?
I would almost put it that depending on the moment, different ones will emerge, like the cross. All of these are very important symbols, sigils, because, and this is something that for people watching, if you think about when you doodle, oftentimes when one doodles, these shapes will reappear. Like people find themselves doing squares, triangles, crosses, helixes. And this is important because oftentimes what we think of as doodling is actually a connection to lost languages that no longer have, in a sense, the connective tissue they once did. So we have elements and vestiges. But what's important is, and I think it's an important exercise as well, is that each of the things we're looking at here are philosophical principles. The dot inside the circle is the manifest, the center, which is everywhere, the circumference, which is nowhere. So essentially, it becomes the symbol of the eternal time and the eternal. The square, the foundation, the triangle, the higher triad of spirit, mind, and soul, or salt, mercury, and sulfur of the alchemist, the cross, all of these. See, I think that one of the elements that, because we study symbolism and we think they represent something, but in many traditions, and this was an exercise I did, and I took it from alchemical texts, which was that it was highly suggested that one redraw the image or redraw the symbol or the sigil. Yeah. And why this is important for us and ancestral intelligence is that oftentimes the intelligence we're seeking, the remembrance we are calling forth, is not in our brain. It's not informational. It's energetic, in the same way how your hand feels the wood and feels the shape or the smoothness. It's a different type of intelligence. And that's why with these symbols and why they are universal symbols is they are packets of information. Like you would argue, they are tuning forks. And that the reason why we go back to the Pythagoreans, why one would spend 5 years in silence with geometrical shapes was that by not imposing a belief upon the shape itself, but by learning to meditate and allowing that the entity or the sentience that is embodied in that shape, it then could move upon you and act as a mentoring spirit, meaning that rather than you learning something and imposing, you were creating a tool by which you were allowing yourself to be inspired.
Yes, and hence ancestral intelligence.
Yes.
Brings us,
it's part of your imprint. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
Very much brings us into that place of, how we can explore these intelligences that seemingly, well, maybe we think they're past, but no, they're timeless. They live in real time, and they offer us an opportunity to explore that intelligence within ourselves, not in a traditional, linear, analytical, or even ways that we think are more creative, but in the imaginative. So if we looked at these pieces and say, and we'll just maybe just drop into them for a moment, because I think this is important work that we offer those that are tuning in here that want to attune, that want to really reactivate their own ancestral intelligence, that this is potentially a way to begin that exploration, because ultimately it takes us back to our own divine sense of being, ourself as these illumined lights, not simply a separate idea of self and disconnection in the world, invites us to come back home again. And in her work, she spoke of the equidistant cross as if that symbol drew you, you're drawn into a deeper relationship of yourself and others and the planet. And if that's the one that said yes to you, if the circle said yes, she spoke of this as a calling to your own unity, your own sense of remembering the oneness of who you are. And in these ancient cultures, they would often use this symbol as their equanimity, as their place of harmony with sky, Mother Earth, the greater quantum field. And then ultimately, when we come into that place of this square, that is the most stable symbol we have, because it holds the stability of us to enter our own consciousness into the world through a stable environment of trust, of safety, that we can actually hold the four corners, the four directions of our lives. And of course, that brings us into this next element of the triangle, which of course we see throughout our journey of either religiosity or philosophy, but we've spoken so much about this. And it's where are we heading in ourselves? What is our true north? Which way are we pointed to in our evolutionary journey? Hopefully as conscious co-creators of our evolutionaries, as stewards of our planet. And then lastly, that double helix is such a beautiful symbol, as you know, of growth, of connection, of what this idea of heaven and earth may be for each of us. So that the journey into ancestral intelligence that you so beautifully have shared and offered to us I think, at least, is of great importance for every single one of us to access this technology and to find an access point, a way to enter into this place through looking at the cultures, our indigenous cultures, our root cultures, our native cultures over the millennium, to invite us into this place of exploration. And this work, I think, is profound in its own way. And I'd love to hear some thoughts on that, although we'll certainly keep it not too long today, and we can continue this conversation. But perhaps you have some expansion of this, Leigh, or anything else that you might add in your own personal experience with symbols and ancestral intelligence.
What I would suggest is simply a bit with acting, we call it suspension of disbelief, meaning that, of course, you know you're not Hamlet, but you are playing Hamlet. So therefore, you suspend your disbelief that you're not Hamlet, and you give yourself permission to become Hamlet. And this is one of the things when we look at the sigils, when we look at glyphs, when we look at things, is that we have been taught, really trained, to look at things in I and thou, like an object. Oh, this is an object I'm looking at. Rather than the Eastern or indigenous approach, which is, no, you're not looking like what we just looked at with the triangle and the square. You're not looking at a drawing of a triangle or a square, that you are dealing with a quality, a sentience that is squareness, that is triangularity, which is so that it's not a mute form. It is actually a living essence. And if we make that subtle adjustment, and as I say, I feel this way almost like with as a director with actors, I'd say that we're the ones that in this process, and if we can approach all of this study of symbolism and ancestral intelligence as one might a rehearsal process, meaning we're not at performance level, we're not even thinking about that. We're trying to utilize keys to explore, and in exploration to allow the thing itself to become more and more the informing agent, in the same way that the water will teach a swimmer how to swim, because essentially the water is the teacher. And I feel with us, in terms of when we're looking for ancestral intelligence, when we are seeking to know these things, that remember that oftentimes if you're just taking a square and you go soft focus, you're just not thinking, you're sort of going into that doodling space, take note of the ideas, the thoughts that flow through your head, from the silly ones to the, isn't that interesting? Because what this does is it begins to loosen up one's resistance to allowing a type of flow of spontaneous energy. Because it's not that a lot of my work, I realize, is to unteach. It's to unlearn many things. Like, we've done such a good job of learning that we forgot how to play. And this is one of the things with my tarot work. I often say that if you can remember playing with dolls, or when you, just as a child, there were spontaneous conversations that would emerge, I would say that with my tarot archetypes, I'd say, well, have more like you're playing with dolls. Have that emperor have a conversation with the devil and the empress, and let's see what that conversation is. Not because you're having a real conversation or you've figured out what the facts are, but because you're allowing this spontaneity to emerge. Oftentimes, this is a very thing that allows us to perceive without, it goes under the radar of our ego, that is really trying very hard to keep things from actually changing our disposition. And therefore, I feel like many of the tools that we are developing is find a place where you can close the door. I always, with my art students, I would say to them, I say, do not share your art with those that critique, but protect it. In other words, be a wise custodian of the things that matter to you. And if you share your work, share it with those that nurture or honor the work by protecting it and not leaving it open to critique any more than you'd want your child or the person you love to be up for critique. I think that we have a need to create what I call the etiquette of energy, meaning nothing is denied us, but we've developed really bad manners because essentially, and I liken it to the hero's quest, we have been fighting dragons for so long. We've become so armored psychically that we try to bring all of that armor in to our home with those we love. And that's why the question now is no longer about what do you hate, how are you fighting the world, but how do you take off the armor? How do you give yourself permission to say, at least here, I will honor these things. And let me begin by looking around at those I love and that which I love. And maybe if I begin to say, this is the earth and the life that I seek to cultivate, that's a message to infinite and divine probability saying, we can do that as well. We don't just have to respond to your fear and bad ideas, but if you start giving us permission, we can show up just when you start saying with the square, what am I thinking? What's going through my mind? Or maybe the cross. Maybe I'd go through each of those images and see what they had to say. And because nobody but you is listening, let it be a little crazy. Give yourself permission. Have a little fun. Because remember, it's not enlightenment. It's enlighten up. Breathe. Enjoy yourself.
Yes, indeed. And in my own personal journey through it, it is an invitation to take a little, what I would say is a walk on the wild side, perhaps, to soften that gaze, to let go of this gripping lens of perception, to suspend those patterns and those wirings we have in our own neurology and our own, upbringings or past or whatever it is, to bring it into this place that invites us to, to connect with that ancestral intelligence, because in that intelligence and in those symbols is an invitation to feel the depth and the infinite nature and the eternal nature of who each of us are. And Will, I want to just say thank you again. It's been so great to hang out and explore this conversation. There's more to be had, and let's see where it goes. And I invite everyone to be in this exploration with us and in your own lives and in that conversation with family, friends, community, and others. And we all are here and we all belong. And the reemergence of our ancestral wisdom and the keepers of the earth are alive in each of us. Blessings, and thank you again.
Thank you, Adam. Bless you.